The grit of the road bit into her palms. Clara coughed, a dry, painful rasp that tasted of alkali, dust, and finality. The stagecoach, a lumbering beast of red wood and black leather, was already pulling away, its massive wheels churning the pale dirt of the main street. It left behind only a swirling cloud and her, deposited like refuse. Her small, floral carpet bag lay a few feet away, one of its brass clasps broken. She crawled to it, her body a single, unified ache. Her cheek throbbed where Mr. Pritchard's ring had connected. Abandoned. The word was too small. This was an excision. She had been cut from the world and left to bleed into the dust of a town that did not even have a name she knew. It was late afternoon. The sun, a merciless copper eye, beat down on the collection of raw lumber buildings. A few men, shapeless beneath wide-brimmed hats, watched her from the shaded porch of a general store. They did not move. A curtain twitched in the window of the assayer's office. She was a spectacle, a woman alone, covered in grime, her bonnet askew. Hunger was a hollow, twisting pain beneath her ribs. It had been more than a day since the piece of hardtack Mr. Pritchard had tossed at her before shoving her onto this stage. Thirst was a layer of felt on her tongue. She pushed herself to her feet, swaying. The world tilted, the rows of bleak storefronts blurring at the edges. She had to find shelter. Night came fast in these high places, and she knew what night brought for a woman with no protector. There was a general store, a blacksmith shop dark with soot, a livery, and, at the far end of the street, a 2-story building with bat-wing doors, a sign, painted in hopeful yellow, read, "The Silver Queen Saloon." Music, thin and metallic, bled from within. Clara flinched. A saloon was no place for a decent woman, but her decency, it seemed, was a currency she no longer possessed. It had been stripped from her, declared counterfeit, and thrown back in her face. Now, all she had was desperation. She pulled her thin shawl tighter, a useless gesture against the judgment that felt colder than any wind. She picked up her bag and walked, her legs stiff, toward the swinging doors. She could hear the murmur of male voices, a sharp laugh. She paused, taking a breath that seared her lungs, and pushed through. The world inside was smoke and shadow. It smelled of stale beer, unwashed bodies, and the sharp tang of whiskey. A dozen men were scattered at tables or standing at the long, polished bar. A man in a dirty apron was playing a piano in the corner, his back to the room. Every head turned. The conversation stopped. Clara froze, her hand still on the door. She was a rabbit in a den of wolves. The eyes that raked over her were not curious. They were assessing. They weighed her, measured her, and found her wanting in all the ways that mattered and available in the one way that did not. A large man in a stained white waistcoat, his belly pressing against the bar, stopped wiping a glass. He smiled, but it did not reach his cold, watery eyes. "Well, now," he said, his voice oily. "Lost, little lady?" "Sir," Clara began, her voice a reedy whisper. She hated how small she sounded. "Please, I am looking for work." A rough-looking man at a nearby table laughed, a short, barking sound. "Work," she says. "You come to the right place for it, darlin'." "I can clean," Clara said, forcing the words out, directing them only to the man behind the bar. "I can cook or mend, anything, just for a meal. A place to stay." The proprietor, Silas, slid his tongue over his thick lips. He walked around the end of the bar, moving closer. He smelled of cigars. He looked her up and down, a slow, insulting inventory. He saw the dust, the fading bruise on her cheek, the desperation in her eyes. "I'm sure you can," he said, his voice dropping low. "A pretty thing like you. We got a special kind of work. It ain't scrubbing." He gestured with his thumb toward a dark hallway behind the bar. "I got a room, nice and private. You can earn your keep easy enough. Plenty of the boys here would be happy to pay for your shelter." The meaning struck her with the force of a physical blow. Her face, already pale with hunger, flooded with a hot, scalding shame. He was offering her a crib. He believed she was a prostitute. "No," she whispered, recoiling. "You misunderstand. I am not—" "Not what?" Silas sneered, his false kindness vanishing. "Not hungry? Not alone? Don't play coy. Missy, a woman don't walk into a place like this unless she's selling something. So, what's your price?" "Please," she begged, backing away, her hand fumbling for the door. The laughter in the room rose, a cruel, enclosing wave. She turned and fled, pushing back out into the brutal sunlight, the jeers of the men following her into the street. She stumbled into the alley between the saloon and the blacksmith's shop, her knees buckling. She leaned against the rough plank wall and retched, but there was nothing in her stomach to come up. Only a bitter, burning bile. The humiliation brought the memory crashing back, vivid and sharp. It was not the dusty street she saw, but the small, clean parlor of the boarding house in Junction City. Just 3 days ago. She had been so hopeful, her best dress pressed, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Mr. Amos Pritchard. His letters had been so solid. He wrote of his ranch, his need for a good woman to make a home. He was a widower. He'd said, pious. The man who met her at the train station was not the man from the letters. He was thin, with pale, restless eyes that never quite met hers. He did not smile. He'd taken her to a boarding house, not to the preacher as he'd promised. He'd inspected her. That was the only word for it. He'd walked around her, his gaze sharp. "You were described as simple," he'd said, his voice clipped. "I am, sir," she'd replied, confused. "And virtuous." I swear it on my mother's grave." He'd laugh then, a dry, unpleasant sound. "The agent who arranged this, he lied, or you did." He'd reached out and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. His fingers were cold. "You have the look of a woman who knows men. I've seen it before. You flinch. You are not untouched." "Sir, no!" she'd cried, trying to pull away. "I have never—" "Do not lie to me, girl!" His hand had flown, the ring on his finger cutting her cheek. "I will not be saddled with damaged goods. I paid your passage, and I've been cheated." She had tried to explain. There was no explanation. He had simply decided. He had seen some shadow in her, some flaw of which she herself was unaware, and he had pronounced her guilty. He had not abandoned her in Junction City. He was too pious for that. He had dragged her to the stage office, his fingers biting into her arm. He'd paid for a one-way ticket to this town, the last stop on the line. A place, he'd said, where her kind would fit in. "Get out of my sight," he'd hissed, shoving her toward the coach. "And tell no one you came to see me." The memory faded, leaving her weak and shaking in the alley. Damaged goods. Not untouched, unwanted, Mr. Pritchard had branded her. The saloon keeper had read the brand. It was the only truth about her now. The sun bled out of the sky, staining the clouds a deep, bruised purple. The air, which had been so hot, turned cold with alarming speed. The desert wind found her, cutting through her thin dress and shawl. She shivered, a deep, bone-rattling cold that came from the inside out. She could not stay in the alley. It was too exposed. She looked around. Behind the blacksmith's shop, there was a small, lean-to structure where the smith must store his coal. Beside it was a stack of old barrels and a broken wagon wheel. It was dark, shielded from the street. It was the best she could do. Clara crept into the narrow space, pulling her carpetbag close. She sat on the cold ground, drawing her knees to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. The music from the saloon was louder here, a tinny, frantic sound of celebration from which she was excluded. The cold was insidious. It seeped into her joints. Her shivering became uncontrollable. She tried to think, to pray, but her mind was numb, frozen with hunger and dread. She was going to die here, she thought, in the dirt behind a blacksmith shop. Hours passed. The music from the saloon quieted, replaced by the occasional drunken shout. The town sank into a deep, cold silence. Clara's shivering had subsided into a dull, dangerous numbness. Then, boots on the gravel. She froze, her heart hammered against her ribs. A painful, frantic bird. A man! He was coming into the alley. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to disappear, holding her breath. A tall shape blocked the faint starlight. He was not loud, not drunk. He was just there. He stopped a few feet away. She could not see his face, only his silhouette. He seemed to be looking right at her. A small, terrified sound escaped her throat. The man did not move, did not speak. He stood there for a long moment. Clara could smell horse and smoke and leather on him. He was a cowboy, she guessed. He seemed to be leading horses. She heard the soft jingle of a bridle. He turned, not toward her, but to a saddle slung over his shoulder. He unstrapped a bedroll. With a flick of his wrist, he pulled a thick, dark wool blanket free. He tossed it. It landed in the dirt at her feet. Clara stared at it, uncomprehending. The man said nothing. He did not wait for thanks. He did not offer a word of comfort or threat. He just turned, his boots crunching softly, and led his unseen horses away toward the dark shape of the livery stable. She waited until the sound of his steps had faded completely. Her trembling hands reached out, grasping the blanket. It was heavy, coarse. It smelled of him, of horse and wood smoke and the clean, dry scent of the sagebrush plains. It was the warmest thing she had ever felt. She wrapped it around herself, pulling it over her head, and for the first time in days, she wept. They were not loud, desperate sobs, but silent, exhausted tears that soaked into the rough wool. She cried until her body was too tired to make any more tears, and then she fell into a shallow, fitful sleep. Sunlight, pale and weak, woke her. She was stiff, her bones aching as if she'd been beaten. The blanket was still clutched around her. The hunger was no longer a hollow ache. It was a dizzying, sharp-edged sickness. She knew she had to move, to try again. She folded the blanket, her movements slow. She would leave it where he'd found her. She could not take it. It was a loan, not a gift. She emerged from the alley. The town was just waking. A baker was pulling bread from an oven. The smell so rich and warm, it made her want to weep again. Across the street, at the livery, she saw the man from last night. He was talking to the livery owner, a smaller, wiry man. The cowboy was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a quiet economy. He was selling horses. She saw. A string of 5 good-looking animals was tied to the rail. He was dressed in worn denim and leather, his hat pulled low. He was rough-looking, his face shadowed by a dark stubble, but he was not like the men in the saloon. He was still. He did not look at her, but she felt he knew she was there. Clara turned away and began her quest. First, the general store. The proprietor, a sour-faced man, was sweeping the boardwalk. "Sir, do you need any help? Sweeping? Stocking shelves?" The man's wife came to the door, a woman built like a barrel, with a face to match. She looked Clara up and down. She saw the dusty dress, the alley grime on her skirt, the bruise. Her eyes narrowed. "We don't," the wife said. The finality in her voice was a door slamming shut. Clara tried the small boarding house at the other end of the street. A landlady was beating a rug on the porch rail. "Please, ma'am," Clara said, her voice hoarse. "I'll work for just a meal. I can launder. I can scrub floors." The landlady stopped, her arms akimbo. She squinted at Clara. Then her gaze flickered down the street, toward the saloon. "I know your kind," she spat. "We run a respectable house here. Be gone with you." "Your kind, the brand." Clara stumbled back. She walked the length of the street, her last hope draining away. As she passed a small alley, two cowboys, young and half drunk even in the morning, stepped out. "Well, looky here," one of them said, grinning. "Lost, little lady?" "We can help you find your way," the other one said, his eyes crawling over her. "Maybe to our room?" Clara flinched and hurried past, their laughter following her. Across the street, Jed watched it all. He had seen her go into the general store. He had seen the landlady turn her away. He had seen the two young fools harass her. He saw the way her shoulders, already slumped, seemed to collapse, her whole body shrinking in on itself. He saw her dignity being flayed from her, piece by piece. His face remained impassive, but his jaw tightened. He finished his business with the livery owner, his voice a low rumble. Clara did not know where else to go. She was back where she had started. The sun was high now, beating down. The dust of the street seemed to rise up, shimmering in the heat. The hunger was a roaring in her ears. The world began to spin, the edges of her vision turning dark. Her legs felt like water. She put out a hand to steady herself, but there was nothing to hold. The ground, which she had bled into yesterday, rose up to meet her. She crumpled in the dirt. A small, forgotten heap, the neatly folded blanket, which she had been carrying, fell beside her. People stopped. They looked. A woman fainting in the street. A spectacle. No one moved to help. Jed saw it. He had just shaken the livery owner's hand. His deal done. He did not curse. He did not sigh. He just moved. He walked across the street, his long-legged strides eating the distance. The watchers parted for him. He ignored their stares, their whispers. He reached the small form in the dust. He looked down at her for 1 second, at the pale face, the cracked lips, the dark smudges of exhaustion under her eyes. Then he bent, sliding one strong arm under her knees and the other behind her back. He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing. She was a bundle of sticks and worn fabric. She was barely conscious, a small moan escaping her. He carried her, not to the boarding house, not to the saloon, but to the livery barn he was using. He walked past the watchers, his expression daring any of them to say a word. They did not. Inside, the barn was dark and cool. It smelled of hay, horse, and leather. He carried her to an empty stall, filled with clean, sweet-smelling hay. He laid her down gently. He went to his saddlebags and pulled out his canteen. He came back and knelt beside her. He lifted her head, his hand firm but not rough against her hair. "Drink," he said. It was the first word he had ever spoken to her. His voice was a low rasp, a sound that had not been used much for talking. It was a command, but it was not unkind. Clara obeyed instinctively. The water was metallic and warm from the canteen, but it was life. It ran down her chin, and she coughed, her body too weak even to swallow properly. He let her head rest back on the hay. He did not fuss over her. He just sat back on his heels, a few feet away, and watched her. He did not ask her name. He did not ask what had happened. He did not ask where she was from or where she was going. He was a wall of silence, a quiet, solid presence in the dim light. Clara was too weak to be afraid of him. This rough, silent man had given her a blanket. He had given her water. He had carried her from the street where she would have been left to lie. She did not feel threatened. She just felt still. She closed her eyes, and the darkness took her. She woke to absolute blackness. The barn was silent, save for the soft stamp of a horse in a nearby stall and the rustle of hay. For a moment, she was suspended in panic. She didn't know where she was. Then it all came back. The stagecoach, the saloon, the fainting, the man. He was here. She could feel it, a presence in the dark. The full weight of her situation fell on her. She was a burden. She was nothing. The despair was a physical thing, a hand squeezing her heart. She had no future. No one had stepped in. No one had offered a hand. She was truly, finally, alone. A sob escaped her, dry and broken in the quiet. "No one wants me," she whispered to the darkness. It was the truest thing she had ever said. It was the core of her, the label Mr. Pritchard had given her, the one the whole world had affirmed. She was used, discarded, and unwanted. There was a rustle from the next stall. He had been sleeping there, or keeping watch. A low voice came out of the darkness. It was not close. He had not moved toward her. It was just a sound, a fact. "Then you'll want me twice as much." Clara went still. The words hung in the air. They were not words of pity. They were not words of comfort. They were not a promise. They were a strange, rough-edged statement that made no sense. But they were solid. In a world that had turned to dust and shadow, this man's impossible words were the only solid thing. She did not understand them, but she stopped crying. She lay in the dark, wrapped in his blanket, listening to the sound of him breathing. The light that woke her was gray and thin, filtered through the barn's dusty air. Clara sat up, her body a single, protesting ache. His blanket was still wrapped around her. For a moment, she felt the phantom comfort of the previous night, the strange, solid presence of the man in the dark, the impossible weight of his words. "Then you'll want me twice as much." What had he meant? She felt a flush of shame. It sounded like the words of a man taking advantage. But he had not. He had tossed her a blanket. He had given her water. He had sat in the dark and breathed. She heard him outside, the soft murmur of his voice, the stamp of a horse. He was leaving. Pride, the only thing she had left, stiffened her spine. She would not be found here. A stray dog he had pitied. She folded the heavy wool blanket, her fingers tracing the rough weave. She laid it neatly on the hay and picked up her carpet bag. She walked to the wide barn door. He was outside, tightening the cinch on a deep-chested roan. His other horses, the string he had come to sell, were gone. This was his personal mount. He was packing to leave. He saw her, his hand stilled on the leather strap. He looked at her, his face unreadable in the morning shadow of his hat. He was rougher in the daylight. A scar, thin and white, cut through his left eyebrow. His eyes were the color of gunmetal. He gave a short nod, as if acknowledging a debt settled. He turned to his saddlebag, pulled out a piece of jerky and what looked like a cold biscuit. He held it out to her. Food. The smell of the cured meat made her stomach twist in a painful knot. But she could not. It was one thing to accept water when she was dying. It was another to accept food now. It was charity. It was a payment for what? For being pathetic. "I cannot, sir," she said, her voice hoarse. Jedediah looked at the biscuit in his hand, then back at her. He did not seem offended. He did not seem anything. He simply tossed the food back into his bag. "I thank you for the blanket," Clara said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "And for the water. I will not be a bother to you any longer." "Town's rough," he said. His voice was a low rasp. It was not a plea. It was a statement of fact, like saying the sky was high. "I will manage." He looked at her for a long moment. He saw the tremble in her hands, the defiant tilt of her chin, the way her eyes were still shadowed with terror. He saw her pride, and he knew it was the only thing holding her upright. He gave a single, sharp nod. He turned back to his horse. Clara took a breath and walked away from the livery, back toward the main street. She felt his eyes on her back, but when she glanced over her shoulder, he was already swinging up into his saddle, his attention fixed on the trail ahead. She was alone again. The town was the same judging eyes from the general store, the same sneer from the landlady, who was now sweeping her porch. Clara had one option left. She would walk. She would walk until she was out of this town, and then she did not know. She was halfway down the street when two men stepped out from the alley beside the saloon. They were the same two from yesterday morning. They were not sober. The smell of stale whiskey rolled off them. "Well, looky here, boys," the taller one said, a stained grin splitting his face. "It's the little dove. She didn't fly far." Clara tried to step around them, her heart leaping into her throat. The second man, stocky and mean-eyed, blocked her path. "Where you hurrying to, missy? We heard you was too good for Silas's place." "Please," Clara whispered, backing up. "Leave me be." "Oh, we don't want to leave you be," the tall one said, moving closer. He reached out and grabbed her arm. His fingers were hot and strong, biting into her flesh. "We got money, good silver. We can pay for your time." "No!" Clara cried, trying to yank her arm free. "I am not—" "You're whatever we say you are," the stocky one growled. Grabbing her other arm, they began to drag her toward the alley. "Silas don't own the street." Clara screamed. It was a thin, desperate sound that was swallowed by the indifferent morning. She kicked, twisted, but they were too strong. Then a sound, not a shout, not a gunshot, just a click. It was the sound of a revolver's hammer being pulled back. It was quiet, metallic, and heavier than thunder. The men froze. The one holding her right arm did not even let go, just went perfectly still. Clara turned her head. Jed was there. He was still on his horse, not 10 feet away. He had not left town. He had been watching. His roan stood like a statue. Jed's right hand was resting on his hip. The gun, a Colt with a worn wooden grip, was still in its holster, but his thumb was on the hammer. His eyes were not on the men's faces. They were on the hand that was gripping Clara's arm. "Let her go," Jed said. His voice was not loud. It was flat. It was the coldest sound Clara had ever heard. "This ain't none of your business, cowboy," the tall one sneered, though his voice wavered. "I'm making it my business." Jed said, "You've got 1 second. She's just a—" Jed's thumb pulled the hammer back another fraction. The sound was a final, deadly promise. The man holding Clara's arm shoved her away. He shoved her so hard she fell to her knees in the dust. "Get on out of here," Jed said. His voice never changed. "I see you in this town again. I won't be this polite." The men scrambled for their horses, which were tied at the saloon rail. They cursed him, called him names, but they did not look back. They mounted up and kicked their horses into a run, heading south. Jed did not watch them go. He looked at Clara, a small, crumpled heap in the street. He let the hammer down gently and nudged his horse forward. He stopped beside her and, without dismounting, leaned down and offered her his hand. It was a calloused, rough hand, stained with leather and dirt. Clara stared at it. She looked at the faces watching from the boardwalk. The proprietor, the landlady, all of them staring, their faces a mixture of fear and condemnation. She was a spectacle, a fight over a fallen woman. She took his hand. He pulled her up. She was lighter than he'd thought. He did not let go. With one smooth, powerful motion, he lifted her off her feet and settled her sideways on the saddle. In front of him, Clara gasped, her hands flying to his shoulder to steady herself. It was scandalous. It was intimate. His arm was a solid bar of muscle around her waist, holding her securely against his chest. "You cannot stay here," he said, his voice a low rumble she felt in her own ribs. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered, her face turned away, burning with shame. "I've got a cabin, few hours north of here. You can stay a few nights. Rest, help with the chores." He paused, and she felt him take a breath. "Just until you figure things out." The excuse hung in the air. It was for her, but she sensed it was for him, too. She looked at the town. The street was full of hatred and hunger. She looked at the man holding her. He was silent, dangerous, and had just saved her. He was offering shelter, not what the saloon keeper had offered. She gave a single, tiny nod, her cheek brushing the rough denim of his shirt. Jed gathered the reins, turned the roan's head, and kicked it into a steady walk. They rode out of town, north, leaving the dusty street and its judgment behind. The ride was silent. Clara sat rigidly, her body held stiff, trying not to lean back against him. But the motion of the horse, the long hours, and her own exhaustion wore her down. Her head eventually slumped, her back resting against the solid wall of his chest. He did not shift, he just rode, his arm a steady presence around her, his eyes scanning the horizon. The land changed. The flat, alkali plain gave way to rolling foothills, dotted with juniper and pine. The air grew cooler, cleaner. There was no trail. He seemed to be following a path only he could see. Just as she thought she could not hold on a moment longer. They crested a ridge. Below them sat a small meadow. In the center, backed by a stand of tall pines, was a cabin. It was not a ranch. There were no barns, no corrals, just the small, solid-looking building and a wisp of smoke rising from its stone chimney. It was utterly isolated. Jed rode them down into the meadow. As they got closer, Clara saw that the cabin was simple, built of rough-hewn logs. But it was not derelict. The roof was sound. The small porch was swept clean, and the single window had real glass. He dismounted, the jingle of his spurs the only sound. He reached up for her. "Easy," he said, and his hands spanned her waist, lifting her down. Her legs were numb and buckled when they touched the ground. He held her for a second, steadying her, then let go as if her skin burned him. "It's not much," he said, gesturing to the cabin. He pushed the door open. Inside, it was one room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A sturdy table and 2 chairs sat in the middle. In the corner was a simple cot, neatly made. A small, lean-to kitchen was built onto the back, holding a cast-iron stove and a wash basin. It was simple, yes, but it was clean, spotless. The floor was swept. A few tin plates were stacked neatly on a shelf. This was not a bachelor's rough camp. This was a place of order. "The cot's yours," Jed said, dropping his saddlebags by the door. "I'll take the floor." Clara stood in the center of the room, her small carpetbag in her hand, feeling completely adrift. "The well is out back," he said, pointing. "Wood piles on the porch. Larder's got beans, flour, coffee." He did not look at her. He was talking to the fireplace, his voice stiff. Clara understood. This was a transaction. He had offered shelter and chores. She would provide the chores. She needed to earn her keep, to erase the debt that grew heavier by the minute. She set her bag by the door. She took off her dusty shawl. "The water bucket," she said, her voice small. "By the stove." She found it, and the dipper. She went out to the well. The silence was immense, broken only by the wind in the pines and the creak of the well handle. She hauled the bucket up, her arms straining. She carried it back inside, her body screaming with the effort. She found a tin coffee pot and started a fire in the stove. She found the beans and set them to soak. She found a broom and began to sweep the already clean floor. She worked until her body was numb, pushing past exhaustion. She was paying her way. She was not charity. She was not unwanted. She was useful. Jed watched her. He had gone outside to tend his horse, but he stood in the doorway now, his shoulder leaning against the frame. He was quiet, but his quietness was not empty. It was full of observation. He watched her for a long time. Then, without a word, he took the axe from the porch and walked into the trees, the sharp thwack of the blade echoing in the clear air. The day settled into a strange, silent rhythm. They moved around each other in the small cabin like two wary animals. Their worlds were divided by work. He would be gone for hours, checking snares, he said, or just riding the high ridges. She cooked, she cleaned, she mended. She found his small stack of laundry, 2 rough shirts, worn thin at the elbows. She washed them at the well, her knuckles raw from the lye soap, and hung them on a rope he strung between 2 trees. He was distant, a man locked inside himself, but he noticed everything. He noticed the flinch. He came in from the cold, his arms full of firewood. He dropped the load into the wood box by the fire. The sound of the logs crashing down made Clara jump, a small, choked cry escaping her. She dropped the spoon she was holding, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror that was far too large for the small sound. Jed froze. He looked at her, his face grim. He saw the shadow of a hand, a blow, a past that had taught her that sudden sounds meant pain. He said nothing, but after that, he moved quieter. He set the wood down piece by piece. He noticed the nightmares. The first night, she lay on the cot, her body rigid with tension, afraid to sleep, but exhaustion took her. Hours later, in the deep moonless dark, she cried out. It was not a word, just a high, thin sound of pure animal fear. "Please, please, I swear, no!" Jed, rolled in his blanket by the cold hearth, was instantly awake. He sat up. In the faint starlight from the window, he saw her twisting in the sheets, her hands clenched. He saw the terror on her face, his own hands clenched into fists. He knew that terror. He had seen it on another face, in another room, long ago. He did not go to her. He did not wake her. He just sat, his back against the stone, and kept watch until her breathing evened out and she sank back into a troubled, shallow sleep. And he noticed her relationship with the mirror. It was a small, cracked piece of silvered glass he'd nailed by the wash basin. One morning, she was trying to pin up her hair. She caught her own reflection. She stopped, her hands frozen in her hair. She stared at herself. Jed, standing in the doorway, watched her. She was not looking at her hair. She was looking at the faded purple and yellow bruise on her cheek, a ghost of Mr. Pritchard's ring. She was looking at the hollows under her eyes. She was seeing what he had seen, what the saloon keeper had seen, damaged goods. Her face went blank, her shoulders slumped, and she turned away from the mirror as if she had been struck. She did not look at her reflection again. One afternoon, he was gone, his horse a distant speck on the ridge. Clara was sweeping, cleaning the corners of the cabin, trying to impose order on her own chaotic fear. Under his cot, she found a book. It was not a Bible. It was bound in worn, dark leather, tied with a string. She knew she should not. It was his, it was private, but she was desperate for a sign, for any piece of him that was not made of stone. Her fingers trembled as she untied the string. It was a sketchbook. She opened it. The drawings were not rough. They were delicate, drawn with a sure hand, the charcoal shaded with a skill that stunned her. The first few pages were horses. Not just a horse, but his horse, the roan. He had captured the intelligence in its eye, the powerful curve of its neck. She turned the page, a woman's hands, resting on a rough-sawn windowsill. They were slender, long-fingered. She turned again. A woman. The same woman. Clara's breath caught, but the woman's back was turned. She was standing in a cabin, looking out a window. Her hair was long, pulled back in a simple knot. She was wearing a dress that looked soft. Clara stared at it, a strange, cold feeling prickling her skin. She turned the last page. It was a cabin. It was not this cabin. It was smaller, nestled in deeper trees. But that was not what made her heart stop. Half of the drawing was detailed. The logs, the stone chimney, the wildflowers by the door. The other half was gone, It was smeared, erased, and drawn over with hard, angry black lines, shaded to look like smoke and flame. A cabin, half burnt. Clara shut the book. Her hands were shaking. She retied the string, slid the book back under the cot, exactly as she had found it. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that she had just looked into the heart of his silence. The storm came a few nights later. It was not a gentle rain. It was a high-country deluge, a violent, cracking assault. The wind screamed through the pines, a sound like a grieving woman. The cabin, which had felt so solid, groaned under the pressure. Rain hammered the roof, and then the lightning started. A brilliant, blinding flash lit the cabin, making the one room as bright as day, followed an instant later by a crack of thunder so loud it seemed to split the world. Clara screamed. She did not just startle. She screamed. She threw herself from the cot and scrambled to the fireplace, curling into a tight ball. Her hands clamped over her ears. "It's just the storm." Jed's voice came from the dark. He was sitting up in his bedroll. "No, no, no!" She was sobbing, her whole body shaking violently. "It's the dark, the light. I cannot be alone in the dark." Another flash, another deafening crash. Clara cried out again, a low, animal sound of pure, irrational terror. Jed saw it then. It was not the storm she feared. It was the dark. It was the vulnerability. It was the sudden, violent light that exposed her, followed by a darkness that promised unseen horrors. He did not light the lamp. The light would only make it worse. He did not speak. He stood up. He crossed the small, dark room, his bare feet silent on the wood floor. Clara, curled in her ball, tensed, sensing him looming over her. She was trapped. He did not touch her. He just sat down on the floor, his back against the stone of the hearth, a few feet away from her. He said nothing. He just sat. He was a solid, living thing in the violent dark. He was a wall against the chaos. He breathed. Clara's sobs were ragged. She kept her hands over her ears, her eyes squeezed shut. But the shaking, the violent, uncontrollable shaking, it began to subside. He was there. He was not touching her. He was not demanding anything. He was just present. The storm raged for nearly an hour. They sat in silence. He, with his back to the wall, knees bent. She, curled on the floor. Slowly, her hands came down from her ears. She uncurled, just a little. In the long, dark quiet after a peal of thunder, her voice came, raw and broken. "Why?" He did not move. He might have thought she was talking to the storm. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered, her voice cracking. No one does this. Not for nothing. What do you want?" She turned to him, a shadow in the greater dark. "Why me?" He was silent for a long time. The wind howled, a low, lonely moan. She thought he would not answer. She thought he would just sit there until she fell asleep. Then his voice came, so low it was almost part of the wind, a rasp. "I couldn't help her. Back then." Clara went still. "Her?" He took a sharp breath, as if the word had been pulled from him. Maybe I can help you." "Her?" Clara whispered again. "The woman in the book?" He turned his head away, toward the black window. Another flash of lightning came, this one more distant. It was not a bright flash, but a blue, ghostly light. It illuminated him for a second. His shirt was open at the collar. The light caught the side of his ribs. Clara saw it, a scar. It was not the small, thin line on his eyebrow. This was a long, puckered, ropey mark that snaked across his ribs, disappearing under his arm. It was a terrible-looking wound, old and silvery in the pale light. Before she knew what she was doing, driven by the shared darkness, by his confession, by the echo of her own pain, she reached out. Her hand, small and trembling, left the floor. She bridged the small space between them. She did not touch his face. She did not touch his hand. Her fingers found the scar. Jed's whole body went rigid. He sucked in a breath so sharp it hissed. He flinched, a violent, full-body rejection of the touch. Clara's hand recoiled. "I am sorry," she gasped. I did not mean—" "Comanche," he ground out. The word was ripped from him. "A raid, years ago." He was still rigid. His muscles coiled like springs. But he did not push her hand away. She, very slowly, her heart hammering, reached out again. She touched the scar, just the tips of her fingers, tracing the raised, damaged flesh. It felt like old leather, smooth and dead. Jed did not move. He did not breathe. He just let her. He closed his eyes, his face a mask of old agony. Her touch was not healing. It was not comfort. It was just real. It was a hand on a part of him he thought had died and been buried long ago. Clara left her hand there, a small, cold anchor on his wounded side, and together they sat in the dark, listening to the storm die. The days bled into weeks. The high country summer settled over the small meadow, thick with the scent of pine and sun-baked earth. The silence between Clara and Jedediah changed. It was no longer the brittle, wary quiet of two strangers. It became a shared space, a language of its own. They built a rhythm, mornings. She would rise first, the cabin dark and cool, and build the fire. The smell of coffee and frying bacon would be the thing that woke him. He would roll from his blankets on the floor, his movements economical, and nod to her, a greeting that was more in his eyes than on his lips. He would go to the well, his shirt off, and she would hear the sharp splash of cold water, the heavy grunt as he washed the sleep from his face. She would busy herself with the skillet, her heart doing a strange, small flip in her chest. While he was gone, riding the ridges or hunting, she made the cabin hers. She found a small, fallow patch behind the woodpile where a garden had once been. She used a broken spade to turn the earth, her hands, once soft, now calloused and strong. She planted the few seeds she'd found in the larder, hoping for some beans, some squash. She scrubbed, she mended, she aired out the musty blankets. She found a wild, thorny rosebush by the creek and transplanted it to a pot by the door. It was a spot of color in a world of brown and green. She stopped flinching when he dropped firewood into the box. He, in turn, stopped dropping it, placing each log down with a quiet care that was more tender than any word. Her nightmares did not vanish, but they came less often. When they did, she would wake, gasping, to find him sitting up in his bedroll, a dark, silent sentinel by the hearth. Just present. He would not speak, and she would not, but she would lie back down, knowing she was not alone, and the terror would recede, its claws slipping from her heart. He never asked her about her past. He never asked who Mr. Pritchard was, or what town she had come from, or who her people were. He accepted her as she was, a woman who had appeared in the dust with a broken carpetbag and a haunted look in her eyes. This silence, this complete lack of questions, was a balm. It allowed her to be Clara, just Clara, a woman who lived in a cabin and tended a small, hopeful garden. One afternoon, she was feeding the roan, stroking his soft nose. The horse, usually reserved for Jed, nudged her hand, looking for another piece of dried apple. A sound escaped her. It was small, a surprised puff of air that turned into a chuckle. It was a smile, a real one, not the tight, pained grimace she'd been wearing for months. Jed was standing by the woodpile, axe in hand. He stopped, his arms frozen in mid-swing. He watched her. He watched this small, fragile light bloom on her face. It was like seeing a dead plant flower. It stunned him. He said nothing, just lowered the axe and watched until she turned, saw him, and the smile vanished, her face flooding with a blush. A few days later, he rode out. He did not say where he was going, only that he would be gone for a day. He rode east, not toward the town where she had been abandoned, but toward a different settlement, one further in the hills. He returned at dusk. He had bags of flour, salt, and ammunition. He also had a small, paper-wrapped parcel. He set it on the table without a word and began to unsaddle his horse. Clara eyed it. It was not hers. She waited. He came inside, washed his face, and sat down to the stew she had kept warm for him. They ate in their usual quiet. Finally, she could not stand it. "What is—" She gestured to the parcel. Jed took a drink of coffee. He looked at the parcel as if he'd forgotten it. "For you." Her hand stilled. "For me?" He pushed it toward her. "Your dress, it's worn." Her fingers, trembling, undid the string. It was fabric, not silk, not fine wool. It was calico, a simple, sturdy cotton, but it was blue, a deep, rich blue, the color of the high country sky just before sunset, with a tiny, hopeful pattern of white sprig flowers. She looked up at him, her throat thick. No one had given her a gift that was not a trap. No one had bought her anything that was not a payment for some expected service. It's beautiful," she whispered, her fingers stroking the simple cloth. "You'll need thread," he grumbled, looking away, uncomfortable with the sudden moisture in her eyes. "I'm riding to town, Saturday, for shot. You can come." He said it simply, but it was a tectonic shift. He was not just giving her fabric. He was giving her a choice. He was inviting her out of the shadows. When Saturday came, she was terrified. She had spent the week imagining it, the stares, the whispers, the saloon owner. "I can stay," she said, her hands twisting in her old skirt. "You can get the thread, just white thread." Jed was at the door, his hat in his hand. He looked at her. He saw the fear. "They're just people, Clara, no better than us." "They're not like me," she whispered. "No," he said, his voice flat. "They're not." He did not say if that was better or worse. He just held the door open. She took a breath, put on her bonnet, and walked out into the sunlight. He had saddled his roan and a small, sturdy mule he'd gotten in a trade. He helped her up, his hands impersonal and strong on her waist. They rode the few hours to the town in silence. It was worse than she had imagined. The town, the one that had cast her out, went silent as they rode down the main street. It was as if a cold wind had blown all the sound away. The landlady, the one from the respectable house, was on her porch. She saw Clara and her mouth formed a tight, disapproving, "Oh." She grabbed her young daughter's arm and pulled her inside, slamming the door. At the general store, the proprietor's wife, Mrs. Gable, watched them dismount. Her face was a mask of sour judgment. Inside, the store was dim. Clara kept her eyes down, her bonnet hiding her face. She went to the back, to the bolts of thread, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would break her ribs. Jed went to the counter. "Need flour, salt pork, and a box of shells. 12 gauge. "Mornin', Jed," Mr. Gable said, his eyes flicking past him to Clara's back. "See you've got company." "I've got a list," Jed said, ignoring the probe. The bat-wing doors of the saloon across the street swung open, and Silas, the owner, walked out. He ambled across the street, his thumbs hooked in his waistcoat. He entered the store, bringing the smell of stale beer with him. "Well, now, Jedediah Coulter," Silas said, his oily voice filling the small space. "I heard tell you'd taken a liking to Charity, but I didn't think you'd bring it to town." Clara froze. Her back was to him, but she felt his words like a physical blow. Jed did not turn. He kept his eyes on Mr. Gable, who was pretending to be very busy weighing flour. "My business, Silas." "Maybe," Silas said, moving closer. He lowered his voice, but in the quiet store, it carried. But it's a small town, Jed. Folks talk. They see a man like you, a man with land, taking in a woman like that. He gestured to Clara. They figure she's earning her keep. Jed's hand, which was resting on the counter, slowly clenched into a fist. You got something to say. Say it plain. I am, Silas sneered. She's a fallen woman, a whore, and you're either a fool or a client. Either way, it makes you look bad. She'll destroy your reputation. What little you got left. Anyway, a man is who he keeps company with. You lie down with a snake, you get bit. Clara's vision tunneled. She could not breathe. She was holding the blue calico, which she had brought to match the thread. She wanted to drop it, to run. Get out of my way, Silas. Jed's voice was a low growl. It was the voice from the barn, the night he'd saved her. Just a warning, Silas said, putting his hands up in mock surrender. Folks around here, they're decent. They don't like her kind, and they won't like you for keeping her. She'll pull you down into the same mud she crawled out of. You'll lose everything. Silas saw Clara then. He saw her white, frozen face, the tears standing in her eyes. He smirked. He tipped his hat to her, a deep, mocking gesture. Ma'am, he said, and walked out of the store, whistling. The ride home was a torment. The silence was thick, suffocating. Clara felt Jed's back, rigid in front of her on the roan. He'd insisted she ride with him, the mule carrying their supplies. She felt the anger coming off him in waves, but it was not anger at Silas. She knew, with a dreadful certainty, it was anger at her, for being what she was, for bringing this shame to his door. When they reached the cabin, he dismounted and pulled her down, his hands rough. He turned, not to her, but to the mule, and began unlashing the supplies, his movements jerky. She stood in the yard, the blue calico clutched in her hand. He's right. Jed did not look at her. He's a fool. He threw a sack of flour over his shoulder. I am ruining you, she said, her voice a broken whisper. I heard him. I saw the way they look at you. They all think I'm what he said, and that you are... I don't care what they think. He dropped the sack on the porch. But I do, her voice cracked. The tears she had held back in the store came, hot and bitter. I won't do this to you. I won't be the snake in your house. He's right. I'll leave. I'll go tonight. I'm stronger now. I can walk. I'll go south. She turned, her hand on the door, ready to go in, get her bag, and erase herself from his life. He moved so fast she did not see it. He crossed the yard in 2 long strides and grabbed her arm. His grip was not gentle. It was not the careful, quiet touch she had grown used to. His fingers were like a steel trap, digging into her flesh, spinning her around. She cried out, a small sound of pain and fear. Her eyes, wide with shock, flew to his hand, then to his face. The old terror, the one that flinched at loud noises and sudden movements, seized her. She was looking at a stranger. His face was dark, a mask of such fury that she recoiled. His eyes were not gunmetal gray. They were black. He saw her fear. He saw her wince. He saw her looking at his hand on her arm as if it were a weapon. His grip loosened instantly, but he did not let go. His hand was still on her, a brand. You're not some secret I'm hiding, he said, his voice a low, rough growl that came from deep in his chest. You're not something I'm ashamed of. You're here. He gave her a small shake, his eyes burning into hers. You're with me. Let them choke on it. You're not leaving. She stared at him, stunned. The tears stopped, frozen on her cheeks. This was not the Jed who sat in silence. This was not the man who gently placed wood in the box. This was a different man, a man of anger, of fire, of a fierce, terrifying protectiveness. He was claiming her, not as property, not as a wife, He was claiming her as a fact. He was standing with her, against the town, against the world. He was daring them to try. He held her gaze for a long, thundering moment. Then he let go of her arm as if it burned him. He turned his back on her, grabbed the last of the supplies, and stormed into the cabin. She remained in the yard, her arm throbbing, her heart pounding a new, wild rhythm against her ribs. The evening was electric. The storm had broken, but the air was still charged. They ate supper in a silence so thick she could barely swallow. He did not look at her. He sat at the table, his shoulders rigid, his jaw tight. After, she took the blue fabric in her sewing box and sat by the fire, her hands shaking as she threaded the needle. He took his axe and went outside. The thwack of the blade splitting wood, a violent, percussive echo of the fury still rolling off him. He chopped wood until it was too dark to see, long after the wood box was overflowing. Clara, her nerves raw, finally put down her sewing. The cabin felt too small. She needed air. She went to the barn, a small, sturdy structure where he kept the roan and the mule. It was warm inside, smelling of hay and horse. A single lantern cast a soft, golden light. She went to the roan stall, her hand stroking the horse's neck. "He's so angry," she whispered to the animal. "I'm not angry at you." His voice came from the doorway. She jumped, her hand flying to her chest. He was standing there, a dark silhouette against the last of the twilight. He walked into the barn, into the pool of lantern light. The fury was gone. His face was just tired, worn. "Clara," he said. She turned to face him, her back against the stall. He crossed the small space, stopping just in front of her. He was so close she could feel the heat from his body. He lifted his hand. It was the hand that had gripped her arm. She flinched, a tiny, involuntary movement. He stopped. He looked at his own hand, then back at her. His expression was one of deep, agonizing self-recrimination. I'm... He did not know the words. "I'm sorry, I would never..." Instead, he just lifted his hand again, slowly, palm up. He did not touch her arm. He touched her cheek. His thumb, rough as corn husks, gently brushed the tears she hadn't known were falling. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. It was an absolution. He lowered his head. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was rough, desperate. It was all the words they had not said for weeks. It was his fury at Silas, his loneliness, his fear. It was her gratitude, her terror, her own deep, aching hunger to be touched by someone who did not want to hurt her. It was a collision. And then, just as suddenly, she tore herself away. She stumbled back, her hands flying to her mouth, her body shaking. "I can't," she gasped, her eyes wide with a new, frantic shame. "Jed, no, you don't understand. What they said, what he said. Silas is a liar." "No," she cried, her voice breaking. Not in that way, but it's true. I am not what you think." The words poured out of her, the secret she had guarded. My intended Mr. Pritchard, he rejected me. He said I was not untouched. He said I was damaged." She was sobbing now, the ugly, ragged sobs of a soul turned inside out. "I'm not decent, Jed. I'm not pure. I'm not clean. I am what they say. I am not worthy of you." Jed watched her. He watched her shatter against the wall of her own shame. He saw the brand that Mr. Pritchard had pressed onto her spirit. He stepped closer, but he did not touch her. His voice was quiet, but it cut through her pain, solid as bedrock. "Then you're real," he said. She stopped sobbing, her breath catching. She looked up at him, her tear-streaked face a mask of confusion. "Pure?" he said, and the words sounded like ash in his mouth. "Clean, that's for angels, for stained glass windows. It's not for people. He slowly lifted his hand and touched the thin white scar on his own eyebrow. People. We get marks. We get hurt. We get dirty. He reached out and, with a tenderness that broke her heart, he touched the place on her cheek where the bruise had been. You're not damaged, Clara. You're not untouched. His eyes held hers. You're real, and you're here. He kissed her again. This time, there was no desperation. It was slow. It was tender. It was a question, a reverence. And this time, she did not pull away. She answered him. Her hands, no longer shaking, came up. They did not push him away. They gripped his shirt, pulling him closer. He lifted her, his arms strong and sure, as easily as he had lifted her from the dust of the street. He did not carry her to the house, to the cot. He carried her to the deepest, cleanest pile of hay in the empty stall, where the lantern light was soft and gold. He laid her down. He did not take, he gave. It was a slow, sacred rediscovery. It was not the fumbling of two young lovers. It was the careful, tender joining of two wounded bodies, two souls who had believed they were forever broken. It was his calloused hands, so gentle they trembled, mapping her skin. It was her fingers, tracing the long, ropey scar on his ribs, not with pity, but with a sense of belonging. It was two scars, touching in the dark. It was the first touch that had ever felt like healing. It was two unwanted people, in the quiet of a barn, trying to feel something sacred again. When she woke, it was to the gray light of dawn. She was in the cot. He must have carried her back from the barn while she slept. She was tucked in, her old dress folded neatly on the chair beside her. He was asleep in his bedroll by the cold hearth, his back to her. She sat up. Her body was sore, but it was a warm, living ache. She felt real. She looked at the man on the floor, at the broad, safe line of his back. She rose, and instead of her own worn, constricting dress, she pulled on one of his shirts. It was the one she had mended. It was huge on her, the sleeves hanging past her hands, the hem falling to her knees. It smelled of him, of soap and wood smoke and the faint, clean scent of the high country pines. She felt safe. She went to the hearth and built the fire. She made the coffee, the movements familiar, comforting. Jed stirred. He sat up, running a hand through his dark, rumpled hair. He saw her. He saw her standing by the fire, bathed in the morning light, wearing his shirt. She looked small. She looked like she belonged. A sudden, sharp fear pierced him. It was a fear colder than any winter, sharper than any Comanche blade. It was the fear of how much he wanted this, how much he wanted her. To wake up to this, to her in his shirt, making coffee. He knew, with the certainty of a man who had lost everything, that the world, that God, did not let him keep the things he loved. Clara turned. She saw him watching her. The shame from last night was gone. In its place, a small, warm smile touched her lips. A real smile. "Coffee's ready," she said. He was about to smile back. He was about to say her name. A sound cut through the morning quiet. A horse, coming fast. Jed was on his feet in an instant, his hand moving to the gun he kept on the mantel. Visitors did not come here. He went to the door, pulling it open. A man on a lathered, tired-looking horse was pulling up in the yard. He wore a dusty, unofficial-looking uniform. "Jedediah Coulter?" the rider called out. "That's me." The man fumbled in his saddlebag and pulled out a folded, dirty piece of paper. He rode closer, handing it down. "Got this in town. From your brother, Walter. Said it was urgent." The name hit Jed like a fist. The mail carrier, his job done, turned his horse and rode away without another word. Clara had come to the door. She stood behind Jed, her hand on the doorframe, the smile gone from her face. Jed's face was stone. He unfolded the letter. His eyes scanned the few, angry lines of script. His hand, the one holding the paper, clenched, crumpling it into a tight ball.
"Jed?"
Clara whispered, her voice small.
"What is it?"
He did not look at her. He looked out at the meadow, at the beautiful, peaceful land that was about to be torn apart. "My brother," he said, and his voice was flat, dead. "Walter, he's coming back." He turned to her then, and his eyes were bleak, the gray metal of a gun barrel. "He's coming to claim his half of the land." He tossed the crumpled letter onto the table. "Trouble's here." The letter was a stone dropped into the quiet pool of their life. The ripples spread outward, chilling everything. Jedediah, who had just begun to open, to breathe, to look at her with something other than guarded duty, closed. He did not slam shut, he rusted over. He became a colder, more distant version of the man she had first met. He was not cruel, he was simply absent. He still ate her food, still chopped the wood, still slept on the floor by the hearth. But the air around him was frozen. He was trying to protect her. She knew it. He was building a wall of ice around himself, and her with him, to shield her from the ugliness that was riding their way. But it felt, to Clara, like the worst kind of winter, the warmth they had found in the barn. That sacred, fragile heat felt like a dream from a different life. Walter Coulter arrived 4 days later, at high noon, as if to ensure the sun was a witness to his claim. He did not look like Jed, where Jed was broad, solid, and dressed in the earth tones of his work. Walter was thin and sharp. He wore a dark, Eastern-style suit, long-frocked and dusty, and a string tie. His face was narrow, his eyes a pale, restless blue, and his mouth was fixed in a permanent, thin-lipped smile that looked more like a sneer. He rode a fine-boned, nervous bay, a horse unsuited for this high country. He dismounted, not waiting for an invitation, and ran a critical eye over the cabin, the small barn, the neatly stacked woodpile. His gaze was that of an appraiser, and he found everything wanting. "Well, brother," he said, his voice sharp and nasal, "this is the kingdom you've built, a pile of sticks in the middle of nowhere." Jed stood on the porch, his body rigid, his hands loose at his sides. He was a mountain waiting for a rock slide. "Walter." Walter's eyes slid past Jed, landing on Clara, who had frozen just inside the doorway, her hands twisting in her apron. He looked her up and down, a slow, insolent appraisal that was far more insulting than the stares of the men in town. He saw her worn dress, her calloused hands, and the faint, residual shadow of fear in her eyes. "And this must be the help," Walter said, his smile widening. He took off his hat in a mockery of politeness, revealing slick, thinning hair. "You've certainly provided for yourself. Jedediah, I trust she's a better cook than you are a businessman." "She's with me, Walter," Jed said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Oh, I can see she's with you," Walter replied, his words dripping with insinuation. He let his gaze linger on the cot, then on Jed's bedroll on the floor, and he chuckled. A dry, unpleasant sound. "Quite the domestic arrangement. Does she have a name, or do you just call her when you need her?" "Go inside, Clara," Jed said, his voice flat, his eyes never leaving his brother. Clara wanted to run, to hide, to disappear, but she also saw the white-knuckled tension in Jed's hands. She would not be hidden like some shameful secret. She stepped out onto the porch, her chin high, and stood beside him. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. "My name," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "is Clara." Walter's eyebrows shot up. "It speaks, my, and with such spirit. You found a real specimen, Jed, but I am not here to admire your acquisitions." He pulled a thick sheaf of papers from his saddlebag. "I am here for what is mine. Father's will was clear. This land, this ranch, such as it is. Half of it is mine. I've had it appraised, and I want my half. In cash. There is no cash. Jed said, there's the land, the stock. You know that. You left, Walter. You wanted no part of it. I wanted no part of the work, Walter corrected him, tapping the papers. I'm not a fool like you, sweating my life into worthless dirt. I'm a businessman, and my half is worth $500. I want it, or I'll have a judge order the sale of the entire property. $500? Clara gasped. It was a fortune. It was an impossible sum. You're a leech, Walter, Jed said, his voice quiet. And you're a hermit, living in the mud with your harlot. Walter spat. The word hit Clara like a slap. Pay me, brother, or I'll take this pile of logs, and I'll see you and your little trollop thrown out onto the road. You've got 1 month. He did not wait for a reply. He put his papers back, mounted his horse, and looked down at them. I'll be in town, at the hotel. Do not make me wait. Jedediah, I am not nearly as patient as you are. He wheeled the horse and rode away, leaving a toxic silence in his wake. Clara turned to Jed. His face was a mask of cold, white fury. He looked like a man who had been poisoned. I will leave, Clara said, the words tasting like ash. It was her fault. It was her presence that had given Walter the weapon. He only said that because of me. If I am gone. No. The word was absolute. Jed, he called me. He thinks, if I am not here, he has no hold on you. He has the will, Jed said, his voice clipped. He walked past her, into the cabin. He picked up his rifle from the rack. What are you doing? She cried, her heart seizing. I'm checking the snares. He grabbed a handful of shells, his movements sharp, angry. Jed, please, talk to me. He turned at the door, and his eyes were the eyes of a stranger. They were cold, empty, and full of a pain she could not reach. There is nothing to say. He wants money. There is no money. Go back to your chores. Clara, this is not your concern. He was gone. He did not just leave the cabin. He left her. He was trying to protect her. He was trying to take the entire burden onto his own shoulders. He was trying to push her away from the ugliness, to keep her clean of it. But in doing so, he took away the warmth, the trust, the gentle reality they had built. He was treating her like a child, like a secret, the very thing he had sworn she was not. The coldness settled in. For 3 days, they lived as ghosts. He would be gone from sunup to sundown. When he was in the cabin, he was silent, staring into the fire, his jaw set, his mind a million miles away, calculating, raging. Clara's heart broke. He was losing his home, the one place he had found peace, and it was because of her. Walter had seen her as a weakness, a fallen woman, and he was using her to twist the knife. She would not let it happen. She was not a burden. She was not a snake. She would fight. She remembered the blue calico dress. She had finished it. It was the only fine thing she owned. She put it on. She took the small amount of coin Jed kept in a jar for supplies, less than $2, and left a note on the table. Took the mule. Went for supplies. She rode to town, but she did not go to the general store. She went to the back door of the boarding house, the one where the landlady, Mrs. Peabody, had spat at her. Clara knocked. Her hand was shaking. Mrs. Peabody opened the door, a wooden spoon in her hand. Her face, already sour, curdled when she saw Clara. What do you want? Work, Clara said, forcing the word out. I told you, we are a respectable... Not to stay. Clara interrupted. To wash, laundry. You have boarders. You must have laundry. Mrs. Peabody looked at her, surprised. I do my own. I am strong, Clara said, her voice desperate. I can scrub. I can iron. You You do not have to pay me much. Just whatever you think is fair. And you do not have to tell anyone. I will come to the back door. I will take it. I will bring it back clean. No one will ever see me." Mrs. Peabody was a hard woman, but she was also a practical one. She was overworked. Her hands were raw from the lie. And here was a woman, a fallen woman, who was offering to do the hardest, most thankless work for pennies, and to do it in secret. It was a bargain. 10 cents a basket, Mrs. Peabody said, her voice still sharp. "And you provide your own soap, and you come only after dark." "Yes, ma'am," Clara said, her body sagging in relief. "Thank you, ma'am." A new, secret rhythm began. 2, sometimes 3 times a week. After Jed was asleep, she would slip out. She would ride the mule to town in the dark, her heart in her throat every time an owl hooted. She would collect the heavy, soiled baskets of laundry from Mrs. Peabody's back porch. She would ride back to the cabin, her body aching. She could not wash at the cabin. Jed would see, he would hear. So she took the laundry down to the creek, a 1/4 mile from the house, hidden by a thicket of willows. She built a small fire, just enough to heat the water in her biggest pot, and she worked all night under the cold, indifferent stars. She scrubbed shirts and sheets and unmentionables until her knuckles were split and bleeding, until her back felt as if it would snap in 2. The lye soap burned her raw skin. She would rinse the clothes in the icy creek water until her hands were blue and numb. She would hang them to dry in the willows, praying the sun would come up fast. Then, the next night, she would retrieve them, press them with a heavy flat iron heated in her small fire, fold them, and ride them back to town. It was brutal, back-breaking work, but every coin Mrs. Peabody pressed into her palm was a victory. She kept the money in a small cloth bag, hidden beneath a loose floorboard under her cot. It was not much, $1. Then, too, it was a hopelessly small amount, but it was something. It was her fight. Jed knew something was wrong. He was not a fool. He saw the new exhaustion in her. He saw the way she hid her hands, the raw, red, chapped skin. He saw the shadows under her eyes, darker than his own. "You're sick," he said one morning, his voice rough. "I am just tired," she said, turning away, her hands tucked into her apron. "You're lying," he said, and the coldness in his voice was laced with a new suspicion. It wounded her. He thought, what? That she was sneaking off to see another man? The one thing he had never asked. He was finally wondering. He was finally believing what Walter and Silas had said. "I am not," she said, her voice sharp with her own pain. "You are not the only one who can keep a secret. Jedediah." The rift between them grew. The silence was no longer companionable. It was a cold, bitter war. One evening, she went to town to drop off a load. She was later than usual. A cold rain had slowed her. She left the basket on Mrs. Peabody's porch and was just untying the mule from the alley rail when she heard them. Well, looky here." Her blood turned to ice. It was the voice from her nightmares. The tall, drunken cowboy. She turned. He was there, and his stocky, mean-eyed friend was with him. They were staggering, blocking the alley's exit. "It's the little dove." The tall one grinned, his teeth yellow in the moonlight. "And all alone. Your big man ain't with you tonight." "Leave me be," Clara said, her voice a reedy whisper. She fumbled with the mule's rope. "Not so fast," the stocky one said, grabbing the mule's bridle. The animal shied, pulling the rope from Clara's numb fingers. "We was just talking about you, about how that fella Coulter cheated us out of our fun." "He's gonna pay for that," the tall one said. He took a step toward her. "And so are you. You think you're too good for us, living up in the hills with him? You ain't." "Please," she begged, backing up, her hands flat against the rough brick wall. "I have no money." "We don't want your money," he sneered. He was so close now she could smell the sour whiskey on his breath. "We're gonna finish what we started, right here. Then we'll see who's so high and mighty." He lunged, grabbing her. His arms were like steel bands, crushing her against him. She screamed, a high, thin sound of pure terror. "Shut her up," the stocky one hissed, looking around nervously. The tall one clamped a filthy hand over her mouth. She bit him. He roared in pain and backhanded her across the face. The blow sent her reeling, her head cracking against the wall. Stars exploded behind her eyes. He grabbed her again, by the hair this time, and began to drag her. "Behind the stable," he growled. "No one'll hear her there." Clara kicked, fought, her nails clawing at his face. But she was weak from lack of sleep, from the laundry. She was losing. "Jed!" she screamed, the name ripped from her throat. "He ain't here," the man laughed. A voice came from the mouth of the alley. It was not Jed's. "I am." The men froze. Jedediah was there. He was not on his horse. He was on foot. He must have followed her. He was just a shape in the dark, but he was the most terrifying shape Clara had ever seen. The man holding her threw her to the ground. "Let's get him!" he shouted, pulling a knife. Jed did not wait. He did not speak. He moved. He was not a brawler. He was a force. He met the stocky man's rush with a fist that sounded like an axe splitting wood. The man's nose dissolved in a spray of blood, and he went down like a poleaxed steer, his head hitting the dirt with a wet thud. The tall one, the one who had hit her, stared in shock. He still had his knife. He lunged, slashing. Jed moved inside the blade, his body a blur. He caught the man's wrist with one hand. There was a sound, a sharp, wet snap. The man screamed as the knife clattered to the ground. Jed did not stop. He hit him. He hit him in the gut, a blow that drove the air from his lungs. Then he hit him in the face. He spun him around, slammed him against the brick wall, and he began to hit him. It was not a fight. It was an execution. Jed's fists rose and fell, methodically, terribly. He was silent. His face was a mask of inhuman rage. He was not just beating the man. He was trying to erase him. He was trying to kill something that had haunted him for years. "Jed!" Clara screamed, scrambling to her feet. "Jed, stop! Stop! You are killing him!" The man was a ruin. He had slid to the ground, a bloody, unconscious heap. But Jed did not stop. He hauled him up by his shirt front, his fist drawn back for a final, fatal blow. "Jedediah, no!" Her voice, high and filled with her own terror, finally cut through the red haze. Jed froze. His fist, slick with blood, trembled in the air. He looked at the man he was holding, then at his own hands, as if he had never seen them before. A violent, full-body tremor ran through him. He was possessed. He looked at Clara, and his eyes were not human. They were the eyes of a wolf, a ghost, a man who had seen the end of the world. He let the man drop. He stood there, panting, his chest heaving, his body shaking. He looked from the broken man on the ground to Clara, her lip split, her cheek already swelling. He had been too late, again. Without a word, he grabbed her arm, pulled her to the mule, threw her on its back, grabbed his own horse which was tied nearby, and led them out of the alley, leaving the two men in the dirt. The ride home was a nightmare of silence. Clara was shaking so hard she could barely stay on the mule. Jed did not speak, did not look at her. He just rode, his back a rigid dark line against the moon. When they got to the cabin, he pulled her off the mule, shoved her inside, and threw a rag at her. "Clean your face." He went to the wash basin. He did not wash his face. He began to scrub his hands. He scrubbed them with the lye soap, his back to her. He scrubbed them until they were raw. But he did not stop. He was trying to wash off the blood. He was trying to wash off the feeling of the man's face breaking under his fists. "Jed," she whispered. He stopped, his hands frozen in the water. He was breathing in great, shuddering gasps. He turned, his face a wreck of agony and self-loathing. He looked broken. He stumbled to his cot, collapsing onto it, his head in his bloody, ruined hands. He was breaking. The man of stone was shattering. Clara, her own pain forgotten, went to him. She knelt by the cot. She did not know what to say. His gaze fell on the floor, on the loose board beneath her cot, the board she had not replaced properly in her haste. He saw the edge of the cloth bag. He reached down, his movements wooden, and pulled it out. He opened it. The small, pathetic collection of coins and bills spilled onto the blanket. He looked at the money. He looked at her.
What is this?
He whispered.
It was for Walter, she choked out. I was doing laundry. In town, Mrs. Peabody. I was trying to help.
He stared at the money. He looked at her split lip. He looked at her hands, which she had forgotten to hide. They were raw, red, bleeding from the lie and the scrubbing. He understood. He understood the nights she had been gone, the exhaustion, the secrets. She had been working herself to the bone, walking into the town that hated her, risking this to save his land. A sound tore out of him. It was not a word. It was a groan of such profound despair that it frightened her. He fell back on the cot, his arm covering his eyes. Clara saw it. The sketchbook. It had fallen from under his cot in his collapse. It was open. It was open to the page she had seen once before, the burnt cabin. But now, she understood. It was not just a sketch. It was a memory. It was his confession. She picked it up. She looked at the careful lines of the cabin, and the angry, violent black smears of smoke and flame that consumed it. Her name. Jed's voice was a dead, raw whisper from behind his arm. Her name was Elspeth. Clara sank to the floor, her hand over her mouth. It was, before, years ago, the Comanche, the raid, the same one. His voice was breaking, the words tearing their way out.
They set the fire. I was in the barn. I was too slow. Clara, I was too late.
His arm fell away, and he looked at her, his eyes hollow, swimming with a grief so old and deep it was bottomless.
I got to the door. I could hear her screaming.
His body convulsed. But the fire, it was, I could not save her. He broke, the silent, strong man. He broke. He curled in on himself, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. The ghosts he had held at bay for a decade had finally overrun him. The sight of Clara, attacked in the dark, had brought it all back. He had failed again. He was the man who was always too late.
Clara's own pain, her fear, her shame.
It all evaporated. All she saw was him, this broken, beautiful, terrible man who had saved her, and who could not save himself. She did not speak. She did not offer words of comfort. There were none. She climbed onto the narrow cot. She lay beside him, her back to his back, her small body pressed against his broad, shaking one. She reached back, her raw, aching hand finding his. She did not stroke it. She did not pat it. She just held on. She held his hand, her knuckles pressed against his, and she anchored him. She held him as he wept for the woman he could not save, for the rage he could not control, and for the world that was trying to burn him down all over again. She held him, and in the deep, shared shadows of their pain, they were no longer two separate, broken things. They were one. The morning after was a new kind of quiet. It was not the silence of distance and suspicion. It was the quiet of a shared, fragile peace. Clara woke first, her body aching, her lip a swollen, tender line. She looked at Jedediah, still asleep in his bedroll. His face, in the gray light, was stripped of its hardness. He looked younger and profoundly weary. His hands were resting outside the blanket. They were a ruin. His knuckles were split open, swollen, and dark with dried blood. She looked at them, then at her own hands, raw and red from the lie. They were a matched pair, wounded. She rose, moving stiffly. She heated water, and when he stirred and sat up, she did not look away. She brought him the basin. "Let me," she whispered. He did not pull away. He let her kneel in front of him. He let her take his battered hands in hers. His skin was rough, calloused, but the flesh beneath was trembling, just slightly. She cleaned his wounds with a gentleness that was almost a prayer. He watched her, his gaze intense, tracking the movement of her fingers, the new, tender puff of her lip. He saw the mark his enemy had left on her, and his jaw tightened. "He hurt you," Jed rasped. "It is nothing," she said, her eyes on his hands. "It is everything." He reached out, his unwounded hand, and his thumb barely grazed her cheek. It was a promise, a vow of protection that had been broken and would be reforged. They were in this new, raw space, the air thick with unspoken words, when they heard the horses. It was not one rider. It was three. Jed was on his feet in an instant, the peace shattering. He moved to the door, his body a solid block of defense. Clara stood behind him, her hand flying to her throat. Walter Coulter was not alone. He sat on his nervous bay, a smug, triumphant smile on his thin face. Beside him was a man in a dusty black suit, carrying a leather satchel, and on his other side, wearing a tarnished badge, was Sheriff Brody, the man from town. "Jedediah," Walter called out, his voice oily and loud. "Your month is up, and the terms, they have changed." Jed said nothing. He looked at the sheriff. "Brody, what is this?" Sheriff Brody looked uncomfortable. He was a man just trying to do his job. Caught between two feuding brothers, he spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Jed, I am here on official business. Mr. Coulter here," he gestured to the lawyer, "has filed some papers, and we have a report." "A report," Walter cut in, his eyes gleaming. "I would call it a certainty. You are harboring a criminal, Jedediah, a fugitive from the law." The air went thin. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "She is no criminal," Jed said, his voice a low growl. The lawyer, a small man with eyes like a weasel, slid off his horse. He opened his satchel. "We have a deposition. Mr. Coulter, sent by telegraph and post from Junction City, from a Mr. Amos Pritchard. It seems this woman." He peered at Clara, who had shrunk behind Jed's shoulder. "This Clara Hayes is wanted on charges of seduction, theft of property, and moral turpitude." Walter's smile was predatory. "It seems your companion has a reputation. Brother, a long one. Ruined that poor man. Pritchard took his money, tried to trap him. She's a wanted woman." Jed's body was vibrating with a rage so cold it burned. "That is a lie." "Is it?" Walter pressed, leaning forward in his saddle. "It does not matter. The law says it is true, and the law says—" Here the lawyer pulled out another, more impressive-looking document, that a man who knowingly harbors a fugitive, who lives with a fallen woman on homestead land, forfeits his claim. "He is bluffing. Jed," Brody said, his voice low, but he was looking at the lawyer's papers, and his face was worried. "Am I?" Walter cried. "The Land Commission will not grant a patent to a man running a den of thieves and whores. It is over. Jedediah, I am here to offer you a final chance." He pointed a thin, gloved finger at Clara. "Give her up. Turn her over to the sheriff. Let her face justice for her crimes. You do that, and we can still negotiate the $500 for my half." He paused, letting the poison sink in. "Refuse, And this lawyer will see you charged as an accessory. You will lose everything, the land, the cabin, all of it. And I will have this entire ranch, free and clear, by court order. Choose." It was a perfect trap. He was being asked to trade his home for her, or his freedom for her. The sheriff looked at Jed, his face grim. "Jed, I have a warrant. From Junction City, for her arrest. I do not like it, but I have to take her in." This was it, the end of the world. Clara felt the cabin floor tilt beneath her. She was going to be dragged back, humiliated, jailed, all on the word of a man who had cast her off. Then she spoke. Her voice was a whisper, but in the terrible silence, it was as loud as a gunshot. "He is the one who lied." All eyes turned to her. She stepped out from behind Jed. She was trembling from head to foot, but she stood tall. She looked directly at Sheriff Brody, ignoring the others. "Sheriff, my name is Clara Hayes. I was promised to Mr. Amos Pritchard. I was a mail-order bride." She told them everything. The words poured out of her, the simple, ugly truth. "I traveled for 3 weeks to meet him. He took one look at me and said I was not untouched. He said I was damaged." Her voice broke, but she forced it steady. "It was a lie. He did not want me. He was a cruel, vain man. He hit me. He wanted to be rid of me without losing his good name. So he abandoned me. He put me on a stagecoach and sent me here, to a town where I knew no one." She took a gasping breath, her eyes burning with the tears she refused to shed. "He spread those lies. He accused me of seduction, of theft, to cover his own sin, to ruin my name, so that if I ever spoke the truth, no one would believe me. I never stole a thing. I never did anything but travel to him in good faith. I am not a criminal. I am the one who was wronged." Her voice faded. She stood, exposed, her entire pathetic history laid bare for them to judge. Walter let out a snort of laughter. "A fine story. A tearful performance. She's a practiced liar. Sheriff, a whore always knows how to cry." Jed had been watching Clara. He had watched her stand in her own truth, shaking but unbroken. He had seen the steel in her spine. He had never loved her more. He did not look at his brother. He did not look at the sheriff. He turned, in front of them all, and faced Clara. He reached out and cupped her face, his bloody, swollen hands surprisingly gentle against her skin. "He called you untouched," he whispered, his voice for her alone. "He was a fool. You are the most real thing I have ever known." And then, in the cold light of day, with his enemies and the law watching, Jedediah Coulter kissed his wife. It was not a kiss of passion. It was not a kiss of comfort. It was a kiss of sealing. It was a brand. It was a public declaration, a line drawn in the dirt. He was claiming her, her past, her wounds, all of it. He broke the kiss, but he did not let her go. He slid his arm around her waist, locking her against his side. She was his. He turned, a single, unified front, to face the men. His eyes were silver, hard as new-mined ore. He stared at Walter, at the lawyer, at the sheriff. His voice was not loud. It was clear, cold, and absolute. "She's mine." He let the words hang in the air for a heavy second. He saw the shock on the lawyer's face, the sputtering, apoplectic rage on Walter's. Let the world choke on it. The power on the porch had shifted. It was no longer a legal proceeding. It was a challenge. Sheriff Brody let out a long breath and slowly shook his head. He knew when he was beaten. "Walter, this warrant from Junction City, it is based on hearsay, on the word of one man hundreds of miles away. And now, she is under Mr. Coulter's protection as his woman. He is taking me to town, Sheriff," Jed said, his voice flat. "Right now. We are getting married.
She will be my wife, Mrs. Jedediah Coulter. Now, what is your warrant? Brody? A warrant for my wife, based on the word of a man who abandoned her 2 states over? You really want to file that paperwork? The sheriff was trapped, and he knew it. In this territory, a man's wife was his domain. The law would not interfere. Brody sighed. He pushed his hat back. Fine, you do that. Jed, you make it legal. He turned to Walter, his voice hard. Your claim on the land, that is a civil matter. It stands. But this criminal accusation, it is finished. You bring this up again, Walter, and I will charge you with harassment. Walter's face was a mask of pure, white hatred. He was shaking. This is not over, Jedediah, he hissed. This is not over by a long shot. You will pay for this, both of you. Get off my land, Jed said. Walter, the lawyer, and a reluctant Sheriff Brody turned their horses and rode away. They left a silence in their wake, thick with victory and the promise of future violence. Jed looked at Clara. Go get your bonnet, he said. We have a wedding to attend. He took her to the nearest town with a church, a small, wind-blown settlement with a white-steepled chapel. The preacher, a Reverend Pike, was a thin, stern man with a face that looked like it had been carved from dried apple. He listened to Jed's request, his eyes darting to Clara, who stood by the door, her hands clasped. He had heard the rumors. This was the town Silas the saloon keeper frequented. The poison had spread. Marriage is a holy sacrament, Mr. Coulter, Pike said, his fingers steepled. It is a sacred union, blessed by God. We know, Jed said, his patience thin. We need to be married. I have heard reports, the preacher said, his gaze fixed on a spot over Jed's shoulder. About this woman. About her past. I'm sorry, Mr. Coulter, but the church cannot bless a union built on such questionable foundations. Clara flinched as if he had struck her, fallen, unwanted, unclean. Even here, in the house of God, she was not welcome. Jed's hands clenched. Foundations! You know nothing about our foundations. You will marry us? Reverend. I will not, Pike said. His own pride stung. He stood. It would be a mockery of the sacrament. I cannot, in good conscience, join in holy matrimony a good, land-owning man and a woman of her known reputation. They were cast out. Jed, his face a mask of cold fury, grabbed Clara's hand and pulled her from the church. She was weeping now, silent, humiliated tears. It is no use. Jed, he is right. The world, it will not have me, and it will not have you, if you are with me. Jed did not answer. He lifted her onto the mule. He mounted his horse. He rode, not back to the cabin, but west, deeper into the foothills, his jaw set. Where are we going? She cried. To get married, he said. He took her to a place she had never seen, a place that felt ancient. It was the ruins of an old Spanish mission, just a few crumbling adobe walls roofed by the open sky. A simple wooden cross, weathered and gray, still stood in what had been the sanctuary. An old man was sitting by a small, smoky fire, his back against the wall. His hair was long and white, and one of his legs was twisted at a sharp, unnatural angle. Elias, Jed called out. The old man looked up, his eyes a startling, clear blue. He smiled, a slow, kind expression. Jedediah, I have been wondering when you would bring her. This is Clara, Jed said, dismounting and helping her down. This is Elias. He was a preacher, before. Elias looked at Clara. He saw her tear-streaked face, her split lip. He saw the raw, protective way Jed stood beside her. He saw everything. The church is not a building, child, Elias said, his voice soft and raspy, like dry leaves.
It is not a man in a black suit. It is this. He gestured to the crumbling walls. The vast blue sky. A place where you can tell the truth. He reached for a worn, heavy Bible. He pulled himself to his feet, wincing, and leaned on a gnarled stick. There are no witnesses, Jed said. There is the wind. Elias replied, and the mountains, and God. They are the only ones who matter. He stood them before the wooden cross. The wind rustled the dry grass around their feet. It was quiet. It was holy. We will do the old words, Elias said. They are the strongest. He looked at Jed. Do you, Jedediah Coulter, take this woman, Clara Hayes, to be your wife, to shelter her from the storm, to protect her from the darkness, to be her one true man, in this life and any other? Jed looked at Clara. His eyes, so often cold, were filled with a fierce, burning light. I do. Elias turned to Clara. Do you, Clara Hayes, take this man, Jedediah Coulter, to be your husband, to stand by him, to comfort his wounds, to be his one true woman, in this life and any other? Clara looked at the man who had pulled her from the dust, who had held her in the storm, who had just claimed her in the face of the world. Her voice was thick, but it was strong. I do. Then, Elias said, his voice ringing in the ruins, by the power given to me by a God who understands broken things better than any man, I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss her, son. You are finally home. Jed pulled her to him. The kiss was not a brand, not a claim. It was a vow. It was quiet. It was shelter. It was real. They rode back to the cabin. It was their cabin now. Night was falling. Inside, the room was the same, the cot in the corner, the bedroll by the hearth, but everything was different. A new, sudden shyness fell between them. She was his wife. He was her husband. He did not go to his bedroll. He walked to her. He stood in front of her for a long moment, just looking at her. Then he touched her face, his rough thumb stroking her cheek. Mrs. Coulter, he said, the words tasting new, strange, and right. The name, her name, it broke her. She wept. A soft, sudden rush of relief, a name, a place, a husband. She was not unwanted. She was his. He held her for a moment. Then he bent and lifted her into his arms. He carried her to the cot. That night, they made love. It was not the desperate, pained fumbling in the barn. It was not the chaste, broken comfort of the night he had wept. It was new. They were less shy. They knew each other's wounds, each other's scars, visible and invisible. There was a desperate, claiming edge to it. They were sealing the vow. They were forging a bond in a world that was trying to tear them apart. It was a rebellion. They were two outcasts, two unwanted souls, in the fortress of their small cabin, claiming something eternal, something the world could not touch, could not stain, could not burn. Clara woke before dawn. She woke to heat and the smell of smoke. But it was not the gentle wood smoke of her hearth. It was the acrid, greedy smell of a conflagration. She sat up, gasping. Jed! He was already awake. He was at the door. He threw it open. The night was lit, bright as hell. The barn, their small, sturdy barn, was an inferno. Flames licked 50 feet into the black sky. A roaring, monstrous thing. The horses! Clara screamed, her hands flying to her mouth. The mule! The roan! Jed was frozen for 1/2 second. He saw it all. The work, the animals, the violation. Then he saw him. On the ridge, just outside the ring of light, sat a man on a horse, a silhouette against the fire he had set. It was Walter. He was watching. A sound tore out of Jed's throat. It was not a word. It was a sound from the time of the raid, a sound of pure, primal rage. He ran back into the cabin, seized his rifle from the rack. and was back out the door before Clara could even stand.
"Jed, no! He is not worth it! Let him go!" "He is burning us out! Clara, he is burning us alive!"
Jed ran into the yard, his bare feet sinking into the mud. He leveled the rifle at the shape on the hill. He fired. The shot cracked, loud against the roar of the flames. The figure on the hill laughed, a high, thin, terrible sound that carried on the wind. Walter wheeled his horse, preparing to flee.
"Walter!"
Jed roared. He fired again, the bullet kicking up dirt near the horse's hooves. He started to run, scrambling up the hill. He was going to kill him. His wife, his past, his home. It all coalesced into a single killing rage.
"Coulter, stand down!"
Another rider, coming fast. It was Sheriff Brody. He must have been trailing Walter, expecting trouble. He cut his horse between Jed and the fleeing figure of his brother.
"Jed, put the gun down. I am warning you."
"He burned my barn. He killed my horses." Jed was shaking, the rifle aimed, his mind splintered. He could see the barn roof collapsing, a shower of sparks. His animals, gone.
"I saw him! Jed!"
Brody shouted, his own gun drawn but pointed at the sky.
"I saw him set it. But you do this, you go after him. And you are the one I will arrest. It's over."
"It is not over."
"It is,"
Brody yelled, his voice desperate.
"This is how it starts. This is how it ends. He burns your barn. You shoot him, his friends. If he has any, they come for you. You go for them. It will not stop. Jedediah, it will only end in blood. Yours, his."
Brody pointed a trembling finger back at the cabin, where Clara stood on the porch, a white, terrified ghost against the dark wood. Her hands pressed over her mouth. Or hers. Hers. The word cut through the rage. The rifle, which had felt so light, suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. Jed's arms dropped. The barrel pointed to the dirt. He stood there, shaking, a man broken, watching the last of his old life burn down to ash. Brody watched him for a long moment, then holstered his pistol.
"Go home, Jed.
What is left of it? Put out the embers. I will deal with Walter.
But I am warning you, this has to stop."
The sheriff rode off into the dark, after the man who had started the fire. Jedediah did not move. He just watched the flames. He had won his wife. He had lost everything else. Clara came to him. She walked across the yard, her bare feet cold, and did not say a word. She did not offer comfort. She did not cry. She just came and stood beside him. She took his free hand, the one that was not holding the rifle, and held it. He turned, his face black with soot, illuminated by the dying flames, and let his wife lead him home. The fragile peace of their marriage night lasted less than an hour. Clara woke to the one smell that haunted them both, smoke, but this was not the distant, acrid smell of the burning barn. This was close. It was the sharp, greedy scent of pine and seasoned wood catching fire right outside their window.
"Jed!"
she screamed, scrambling from the cot. The cabin was lit with a flickering, hellish orange. Jed was already at the window, his face a mask of disbelief. It was not the cabin itself, not yet. It was the woodpile, stacked high against the cabin's north wall, and the small, new shed he had built just yards away. He had traded his spare rifle for a new mule and a few chickens, a desperate attempt to start again. They were in the shed. "He came back," Jed whispered, his voice dead. "Walter, he had come back to finish it." Clara did not think. The animals, the mule, their last, small hope. She grabbed a blanket from the cot, shoved past Jed, and ran out the door.
"Clara, no!"
The heat struck her like a physical blow. The entire woodpile was a roaring furnace, and the flames were already licking up the cabin wall. The shed was just catching, smoke pouring from its seams.
"The mule!" she screamed, yanking the shed door open. A wall of thick, oily smoke billowed out, choking her. She plunged in, the blanket over her head. She could hear the mule screaming, a high, terrified sound. The chickens were a frantic flurry of wings and squawks. "I am here! I am here!" she cried, her eyes streaming. She found the rope, her hands fumbling with the knot. The air was poison. She could not breathe. Her lungs felt as if they were collapsing. The mule, in its terror, kicked out, striking the wall. Clara fell, her head hitting the packed earth floor. The smoke was thickest here. She was drowning in it. The last thing she saw was the roof beginning to glow red. The cabin door burst open. Jed had not followed her. He had gone for the water buckets, a useless, frantic gesture. He saw her go into the shed. He heard the mule's terror. He saw her disappear. "Clara!" He dropped the buckets. He ran. He did not grab a blanket. He did not hesitate. He plunged into the smoke, a man charging back into the fire that had taken his past. He found her on the floor, a small, dark heap. The mule was down, its leg broken. The chickens were silent. The fire was roaring, the roof timbers groaning. He was not too late. Not this time. He scooped her up, his arms locking under her body. He turned, his head down, and ran for the door, shielding her with his own back. He did not feel the heat. He did not feel the pain. He just moved. A beam burned through, crashed down where they had been a second before. He burst out into the night, into the clean, cold air, just as the shed roof collapsed in a geyser of sparks. He did not stop. He ran past the burning cabin wall, past the inferno of the woodpile, all the way to the creek. He fell to his knees in the shallow, icy water, still clutching her. He laid her on the muddy bank. She was not breathing. "No," he whispered. "No, not you, not you." He put his hands on her chest, his mind blank with a terror that was deeper than any grief. He pushed, a rough, desperate rhythm. "Breathe, Clara. Damn you, breathe!" She could, a wrenching, painful sound. Water, black with soot, trickled from her lips. Her body convulsed, and she took a ragged, sobbing breath that sounded like tearing silk. Her eyes fluttered open. She saw his face, black with grime, stark with terror. "Jed," she wheezed. He collapsed over her, his forehead resting on her shoulder, his body shaking with a relief so profound it was indistinguishable from agony. He felt the pain then. He looked down at his hands. He had held her. He had carried her. He had pulled her from the fire, but he had used his hands to do it. He had grabbed the burning door latch. He had shielded her head with his arm. His hands braced against the inferno. They were not hands anymore. In the flickering light of his burning home, he looked at the raw, weeping, ruined flesh. The skin was gone, split and blackened. He tried to make a fist. He could not. He tried to straighten his fingers. He could not. Clara, her lungs screaming, pushed herself up. She saw his hands. She saw his future, their future, turning to ash. "Oh, God," she wept. "Jed, no, your hands." He looked at her, his wife, his living, breathing wife. He looked at the ruin of his hands. He had made the trade, Elspeth for his hands. He finally had an answer. "It is all right," he whispered, his voice raw. "I got you out." He could not hold a gun. He could not swing an axe. He could not braid a rope. His life as a cowboy, as a rancher, as a man of force, was over. He was a cripple. The first gray light of dawn found them huddled by the creek, wrapped in the one wet blanket. The cabin. The north wall was gone. The roof caved in on that side. The shed was a pile of smoking embers, a terrible smell hanging in the air. Their world was a charred, black wound. They were sitting there, two lost souls in a landscape of ruin. When the first wagon crested the ridge, it was Mr. Gable from the general store.
His wife sat beside him, her face a stern, disappose-inspiring mask. They pulled up. Mrs. Gable, the woman who had stared at Clara with such contempt, looked at the smoking ruin. She looked at Clara, her hair singed, her face black, her dress in tatters. She looked at Jed, his hands held uselessly in his lap, his face a mask of shock. "God have mercy," Mrs. Gable breathed. She got down from the wagon. She was carrying a box. She walked not to Jed, but to Clara. "You look," she began, then stopped. Her hard face softened, just a fraction. "You look like you need this." She opened the box. It held bandages, clean linen, a jar of burn salve, and a small bottle of laudanum. Clara just stared at her, uncomprehending. "For his hands," Mrs. Gable said, her voice sharp, as if embarrassed by her own kindness. "And this?" She handed Clara a thick woolen shawl. "You will catch your death." "Mr.?" Gable cleared his throat. He was a small, sour man, but he looked ashamed. That Walter Coulter. He rode through town last night like the devil was on his tail. Sheriff Brody, he told us what happened. The first fire. This is too much. No man deserves this." He looked at the burned-out wall of the cabin. I got some lumber, some spare, from the new storefront. It ain't much, but I can bring it by tomorrow, to help patch that hole. Winter's comin'." Clara could not speak. She just nodded, her eyes streaming. Another wagon. It was Mrs. Peabody, the landlady. She, too, looked grim. She did not speak to Clara. She just walked over, set a heavy basket on the ground, and walked back to her wagon. Inside was a fresh-baked loaf of bread, a wedge of cheese, and a jug of clean water. The town that had branded her, cast her out and watched her faint in the street. It was turning, not to love, not to acceptance, but to a simple, grudging, human sympathy. Walter Coulter had finally gone too far. He had crossed a line from prejudice to pure, evil destruction, and the decent, hard people of the town would not stand for it. They would not embrace Clara, but they would not let her burn. The news came 3 days later. Sheriff Brody rode out to the half-ruined cabin. Jed and Clara were sitting on the porch, a patchwork of donated boards covering the hole in their home. Clara had been tending Jed's hands. They were a horror, swollen, weeping, wrapped in clean linen. The pain was so great he had barely spoken. He sat, staring at his useless hands. A man hollowed out. "Jed, ma'am," Brody said, tipping his hat. He looked tired. Walter, is he?" Clara began. "He is dead," Brody said, his voice flat. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Jed's head came up, his eyes sharp. "His horse," Brody continued, his gaze careful, fixed on Jed. "Found him this morning, at the bottom of Split Rock Canyon. Looks like his horse went over the edge in the dark. A terrible accident." Silence. The wind whispered through the charred pines. "An accident," Jed repeated. His voice was a rasp. "That is what the tracks say," Brody said. He kept looking at Jed, at the man whose hands were so badly burned he could not hold a spoon, let alone a rifle or a horse's reins. There were no other tracks. Jed, none. Just the horse must have spooked. A rattlesnake, maybe, or a shadow." A long, unspoken understanding passed between the two men. Brody was giving Jed an answer. He was closing the book. "He will be buried in the town plot," Brody said. As his brother, you should." "No," Jed said. "Bury him. It is done." Brody nodded. He knew. He looked at Jed's bandaged hands. I'm sorry about this. Jed, about all of it." He turned his horse. "I do not think you will be bothered again." He rode away. Clara looked at her husband. His face was unreadable. Had he? In the night, his hands ruined. Had he somehow? No. He had been beside her. He had been in agony. It was an accident. It was God. It was just done. Jed said nothing. He just closed his eyes, his first real breath in a month rattling in his chest. The months passed. Autumn bled its cold fire across the hills. The cabin was rebuilt, with wood from Mr. Gable, and help from 2 other ranchers who had heard the story and showed up one day, their faces grim, hammers in their hands. They did not speak of Walter. They just worked. The wound of the fire scarred over. The cabin was whole, but Jed was not. His hands, they healed, but they healed badly. The new skin was a mass of tight, ropey, purple scars. His fingers were curled, frozen into a claw-like grip. He had no strength. He could not lift the axe. He could not tighten a cinch. He could not hold his rifle. The life he had known was gone. He fell into a darkness. He sat for days on the porch, staring at his monstrous hands. A silent, grieving man. He was useless. He could not provide. He could not protect. He was half a man, a burden on the woman he had sworn to shelter. Clara, her own lungs still tender, her heart still aching, refused to let him go. She hunted. She took his rifle, the one he could no longer hold, and learned. She was a bad shot at first, wasting precious ammunition, but she learned. She set his snares, her own hands growing calloused and tough. She did the work. She chopped the wood, her small body straining with every blow. She fed them, and she sat with him. One afternoon, she came out onto the porch. He was staring at his hands, his face a mask of self-loathing. She sat beside him. She did not bring food. She did not bring comfort. She brought the sketchbook. She opened it to a blank page. She put it in his lap. Then she took a piece of charcoal, and she did not try to put it in his ruined right hand. She placed it in his left. He stared at it, as if it were a snake. "I cannot," he whispered. "Your right hand is broken," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Your left hand is not. Your eyes are not. Your heart is not." She touched his temple. "The horses are still in here. Jed, the woman with her back to the window. The cabin, they are still in there. Let them out." He looked at his left hand, a strange, unfamiliar thing. He tried to close his fingers around the charcoal. It was clumsy, awkward. He made a mark. It was a jagged, ugly black line. He threw the charcoal down in disgust. "It is useless." "So was I," she said quietly. "I was useless. I was a piece of damaged goods, lying in the dirt. You did not leave me there. So, pick it up." He glared at her. His eyes were full of fire. "Pick it up, husband," she whispered. His jaw set. He fumbled for the charcoal. He picked it up. He started to draw. It was a torment. His lines were shaky, the proportions were wrong, but he did not stop. He drew for an hour, his tongue sticking out in concentration, sweat beading on his forehead. He drew until his unfamiliar muscles screamed. When he was done, it was terrible. It looked nothing like a horse. It was a child's scribble. "It is a start," Clara said, and she kissed his scarred right hand. He drew every day. Winter closed in, trapping them in the cabin. The snow piled high. He drew. Clara mended. She cooked. She read to him from the one book of poems Elias had given them. And he drew. The lines grew steadier. He learned to control the pressure. The scribbles began to take shape. A cup, a chair, her hand, mending a shirt. He was drawing her. One afternoon, the pale winter light on her face. When she looked up, she had been pale, tired, for weeks. "Jed," she said, her voice small. "Your head is tilted," he grumbled, his left hand moving across the paper. "Jed, I have to tell you something.
He stopped. He looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, a fear he had not seen in months. What is it? Are you ill? No, she said, her hands coming to rest on her own stomach. Not ill.
He stared at her hands.
He did not understand. I am with child, she whispered.
The charcoal fell from his hand. It clattered to the floor.
Child, a baby.
He looked at her, his eyes wide with a terror so pure, so cold. It stopped his heart. A child, here, now, with him. A man with useless hands. A man who could not protect his wife, his home, his animals. A man who had lost everything. He was being given the most fragile, most precious thing of all, a thing to lose. He did not shout for joy. He did not smile. Jedediah Coulter, the man of stone, put his head in his lap, and he wept. He wept for Elspeth. He wept for his horses. He wept for his own broken body, but mostly, he wept from a fear so profound it had no name. He was a failure. He was a cripple, and he was going to be a father. He felt her hand on his hair, soft. He looked up. Clara was kneeling in front of him. Her face was not full of joy. Either, it was full of understanding. She saw his terror. She knew him. She took his face, his scarred, weeping face, between her two small, calloused hands. You are not alone anymore, she said, her voice a bedrock. You hear me? You are not a failure. You are not alone. We are not alone. I am here, and I will not leave. He looked at her, his wife, the woman who had fought for him, who had worked for him, who was teaching him how to live again. He took a great, shuddering breath, and he nodded. The first heavy snow of winter fell. The world outside was white, cold, and cruel. Inside the small, patched cabin, it was warm. Clara and Jed sat on the porch, a miracle of a sunny winter afternoon. The air was biting, but the sun was bright. They were wrapped in a single, heavy wool blanket, the one he had tossed to her in an alley, a lifetime ago. She was leaning against his shoulder, her body full with new life. He was not drawing. His scarred right hand and his new, strong left hand were both resting on top of hers, on her lap. The world was still a hard place. Survival was not a given. There would be more storms, more hunger, more pain. But as they sat there, breathing in the cold, clean air, they were a single, solid thing. They were not two broken souls. They were a family. And that, in the end, was not just survival. It was victory. Thank you for listening to our story. Please comment where you are listening from to connect with others. And we invite you to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in English.